Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping back in time, back to when our planet was a ghost of what it used to be. We're here to witness the world as it looked on the morning after the apocalypse. Picture yourself standing on a barren plain, 251.9 million years ago. The air is thin, bitter with the taste of sulfur. The sun glares down through a brown, smoky haze, and around you, silence. An eerie, total stillness. This isn't the end of the world. It's the first day after the end. The cataclysm that caused it wasn't some sudden fiery asteroid like the one that took out the dinosaurs. No, this was slower. A creeping death that came from within the Earth itself, like the planet's own immune system turning against it. For thousands upon thousands of years, the ground split open in what's now Siberia, a wound that poured endless lava and filled the sky with poison. This unrelenting eruption triggered a runaway greenhouse effect that boiled the oceans, choked the land, and nearly erased life altogether. So, how does a planet recover from that? What kind of life can cling on in a global wasteland? And what does it mean to survive when the world you've inherited is a hollow echo of what came before? Thanks to decades of incredible geological and fossil detective work, tonight we'll walk through this broken world together, day by agonizing day. And honestly, if you were dropped into this world without a life support suit, you'd black out in under 2 minutes. The heat, the lack of oxygen, and the toxic air would knock you out fast, which might actually be a mercy. Before we start, take a second to like this video and subscribe, only if you actually enjoy what I do here. That tiny click tells the algorithm that long-form, serious, educational content still matters, and to me, it's a huge show of support. Thank you so much for keeping this channel alive. I always love seeing where you're watching from. So drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan if you want that soft background hum, and let's sink into tonight's journey together. The killer from within, the great dying, the event that created this wasteland is known as the Permian Triassic Extinction, or more grimly, the Great Dying. The villain wasn't a classic volcano with a cone and crater. It was something much bigger and far more terrifying. The Siberian traps. Imagine cracks so massive they stretch across continents, not exploding, but bleeding molten rock for hundreds of thousands of years. The scale of destruction is almost impossible to imagine. Geologists estimate that enough lava erupted to cover the entire continental United States in a layer a full kilometer thick. And this wasn't a single explosion, it was a siege. A geological assault the planet's biosphere simply couldn't survive. But the lava itself wasn't the main killer. The real death came from the chain reaction it unleashed. These eruptions released staggering amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, sparking a runaway greenhouse effect that sent global temperatures soaring. The sky rained acid, stripping forests bare and poisoning the soil. And as the planet baked, the oceans began to die too. Warm water holds less oxygen, and soon the deep seas turned into vast, suffocating dead zones. Scientists still debate which of these kill mechanisms was the worst, but one leading theory paints a horrifying picture. In those oxygen-starved depths, sulfur-eating bacteria thrived, releasing enormous clouds of hydrogen sulfide gas, the stench of billions of rotten eggs. That gas rose up from the oceans, poisoning the air and suffocating the few survivors left on land. When it was finally over, the damage was almost total. Roughly 96% of all marine species were gone. On land, 9 out of every 10 animals were wiped out. Even the insects suffered, the only mass extinction in history to nearly wipe them out too. When even cockroaches are struggling, you know things have gone unimaginably bad. The world you're standing in now belongs to the survivors, a quiet, empty planet waiting to see if life could start again. A world in shock, the Induan age. You've entered what's called the Induan age, the first 2 million years after the Great Dying, from about 251.9 to 249.9 million years ago. But don't think of this as recovery. Think of it as a 2 million year trauma response, a planet in shock stripped down to its most basic life forms. The world map is unrecognizable. There are no familiar continents, no Atlantic, no Indian Ocean, just Pangea, one colossal landmass stretching from pole to pole, surrounded by a single endless super-ocean called Panthalassa. The sheer size of this continent created brutal extremes. Most of the land was so far from the ocean that there was no moisture, no moderating climate, just heat and endless desert. A wasteland so vast it would make the Sahara look like a sandbox. The Planetary Fever. But the worst part was the heat. This was a greenhouse Earth, burning with a planetary fever. The same gases that had choked the Permian world still lingered in the air, trapping solar radiation with terrifying efficiency. At the equator, the ocean's surface didn't just shimmer, it simmered. And this isn't guesswork. Geochemists can actually read the planet's ancient temperature records by studying the oxygen isotopes in fossilized shells of tiny marine creatures. Their findings? The average sea surface temperature in the tropics hit around 104 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than a modern-day jacuzzi. That's the same temperature modern health experts warn you never to exceed in a hot tub. The difference is that here, the entire ocean is the hot tub, minus any sense of relaxation. And on land, it's even worse. Far from the coasts, where the sea's faint coolness fades away, daytime temperatures regularly soared past 140 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to slow-cook meat right on the bone. But raw temperature alone doesn't show just how deadly this world was. You'd be facing what scientists call a wet bulb event, a lethal mix of heat and humidity that marks the point where sweating no longer cools the body. In the humid coastal regions of this greenhouse Earth, your sweat wouldn't evaporate. Your body would have no way to shed heat. Within hours, your core temperature would rise uncontrollably, your organs would begin to fail, and you'd die of internal heat stroke. This suffocating heat was the engine driving the planet's chaos. At the center of the supercontinent rose a monstrous mountain range, the central Pangean Mountains, a jagged spine of rock taller than the Himalayas. Geologists still debate their full reach, but every model agrees. These peaks created an enormous rain shadow that blocked ocean moisture from ever reaching the heart of the continent. The result was a wasteland beyond imagination. The deserts of Dune would look like pleasant vacation spots compared to this. For thousands upon thousands of miles, the land stretched out as endless seas of red dunes shifting under a dim, hazy sun. Life wasn't just scarce, it felt impossible. This was the stage the survivors were left to inherit, a silent, blistering world baking under a relentless sky. Even if you could somehow withstand the crushing heat, your next problem would be breathing, because the air itself was your enemy. You'd try to take a deep breath, but your lungs would feel hollow, unable to draw in enough from the thin, hostile atmosphere. The oxygen levels that sustain modern humans sit comfortably at 21%. Here, in the early Induan, that number had fallen to about 12%, maybe 15% on a good day. That may not sound catastrophic, but it's the difference between life and death. You've been dropped into the atmospheric equivalent of a Himalayan death zone, but without any time to adapt. Even the fittest human would begin to fade fast. Below 16% oxygen, thinking becomes sluggish. At 12%, your body starts shutting down. Your heart hammers against your ribs, desperate to pump what little oxygen remains. Your breath turns shallow and rapid. A crushing headache builds behind your eyes as your brain swells, struggling for air. Nausea, dizziness, and exhaustion wash over you. If you stayed here, your fate would be grim. Your lungs would begin to fill with fluid, a condition climbers know as high-altitude pulmonary edema. You'd drown slowly on dry land. At the same time, your brain would swell inside your skull, leading to confusion, hallucinations, and eventually, merciful darkness. You're not just standing in a hostile environment. You're standing on a planet actively trying to kill you with every breath. And low oxygen is only half the problem. The air is also toxic. The volcanoes may have quieted, but the sky still holds their poison. There's a sharp metallic taste from the lingering sulfur and high levels of carbon dioxide. The world smells like a mix of volcanic fumes and decay drifting from the dead, anoxic oceans. It's the scent of a planet in decline. Looking up, there's no comfort. The sun hangs as a pale, washed-out disk behind a veil of dust and volcanic haze. Some scientists think that haze might have tinted the sky a sickly brown or purple, a kind of endless twilight. But worse than the gloom is the radiation. The chemistry of the great dying tore apart the ozone layer. Volcanic gases filled with chlorine and bromine blasted into the stratosphere, destroying Earth's UV shield. Without it, deadly ultraviolet light scorched the planet. Exposed skin would burn in minutes. Plants were mutated or killed by constant radiation. Every patch of sunlight became a threat. The air suffocates you, the heat cooks you, and the sunlight itself poisons you. And then, on a distant, desolate coast, you'd notice the horizon darkening far too quickly. The air grows heavy. The wind starts to moan, a deep, hollow howl that seems to come from everywhere at once. You're about to witness something far worse than a hurricane, a hypercane. This isn't just a storm, it's a weapon of extinction, a weather system so violent it becomes a geological event. Scientists theorize that when ocean temperatures climb above 122 degrees Fahrenheit, the normal physics of hurricanes break down. The heat and vapor create a runaway engine of destruction that spins into something apocalyptic. In the shallow seas of the ancient Tethys Ocean, conditions were perfect for such monsters. As the storm approaches, the air itself seems to scream. You wouldn't just be knocked over, you'd be ripped apart. Winds could reach 600 miles per hour, twice the speed of the most powerful tornado ever recorded. They wouldn't just flatten cities, they'd strip the ground bare, tearing away soil, rock, and every trace of life, and the scale of it defies belief. A hypercane could stretch wider than the entire continental United States. There's no escaping it. For weeks, maybe months, the storm would be your entire world. Even stranger is what happens in the eye. The pressure there would drop so low it would mimic conditions found at the edge of the stratosphere. Even if you could somehow stand there, the lack of pressure would make the nitrogen in your blood bubble out. A hypercane doesn't just kill with wind or water, it kills with physics itself. This is the weather of a broken planet, a world where the elements have turned into predators. By now you're probably wondering how anything could have possibly survived. And for the most part, it didn't. Vast regions of Pangea were nearly lifeless, but the world wasn't completely dead. It was simply stripped down to its bare minimum. Scattered across the planet were what paleontologists call disaster taxa, tough, opportunistic species that thrive in ruin, like weeds after a wildfire. They were the squatters of a shattered kingdom. What's most striking isn't what's still alive, but what's gone. The rich, complex food webs of the Permian world are erased. The forests, the layered ecosystems, the intricate balance of predator and prey, all gone. What remains is flat, simple, and silent, a planet in recovery mode, haunted by the memory of the world that came before. It isn't a living world. It's a ghost. You can hear the emptiness before you even feel it. Standing in a sparse polar woodland, the only sound that cuts through the still air is the low whistle of wind weaving through the tough, needle-leaved trees. There's no buzzing of insects, no chorus of bird calls, just silence. The planet itself feels hollow, drained of life. It's a deep, post-apocalyptic quiet that tells you just how much the world has lost. In this stripped-down, starving ecosystem, a new rule has taken hold. Get smaller or die. It's a pattern scientists know well from the fossil record, called the Lilliput effect, a survival phenomenon where the few species that make it through a mass extinction emerge smaller than their ancestors. When food is scarce and the environment brutal, size becomes a liability. A smaller body needs less energy, matures faster, and can reproduce more often, all critical advantages when the world itself seems to be collapsing. This trend shows up across many survivors of the Permian apocalypse, including the era's top predator, Moschorhinus. Fossils from this period reveal that individuals were around 13% smaller than their pre-extinction relatives, a kind of island dwarfism, but stretched across an entire planet. Still, not every part of Pangea was a total wasteland. Life managed to hang on in isolated refuges, scattered pockets in the far north and south, away from the unbearable heat of the equator. These regions weren't pleasant, but they were survivable. Their climates shifted between warm and temperate, never cool enough for ice, but mild compared to the planet's scorched heart. It was here, in these fragile oases of stability, that the next act of Earth's story began. And the unlikely hero of this new world was about as humble as they come. If you could step into one of these temperate refuges, the first creature you'd notice would be the undisputed ruler of the Triassic wasteland, the unexpected king of Pangea. Its name was Lystrosaurus. At first glance, it hardly looks like royalty. Lystrosaurus wasn't a dinosaur, or even a reptile in the true sense. It belonged to a group of mammal-like creatures known as therapsids, distant relatives of our own lineage. Imagine something the size of a pig, with a stocky, barrel-shaped body, short legs that stuck out to the sides, and a small, blunt head tipped with a hard, turtle-like beak. Its only real weapons were two downward-pointing tusks jutting from its upper jaw, more ornamental than deadly. It wasn't fast. It wasn't armored. It wasn't a killer. By all appearances, it looked more like prey than a conqueror. And yet, this unimpressive little herbivore didn't just survive the Great Dying, it dominated the world that followed. The fossil record from South Africa's Karoo Basin tells the story in stark detail. In the rock layers below the extinction boundary, Lystrosaurus fossils are rare, just one part of a thriving, diverse ecosystem. But cross the line into the earliest Triassic strata above it, and everything changes. Diversity collapses, and suddenly Lystrosaurus bones are everywhere. Up to 95% of all land vertebrate fossils from that time belong to this single species. Let that sink in. 95 out of every 100 animals. Imagine walking through modern wilderness and seeing nothing but herds of the same pig-sized, tusked creatures grazing as far as the eye can see. A biological monoculture stretching across continents. The king of this shattered world wasn't a fearsome predator. It was a resilient, burly herbivore that simply refused to die. For decades, paleontologists have argued over why Lystrosaurus thrived while nearly everything else vanished. Was it extraordinary adaptation or blind luck? The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. Luck may have opened the door, but Lystrosaurus had the tools to walk through it. Its greatest weapon wasn't speed, strength, or armor. It was engineering. This was a digger, an animal built for life underground. Its front limbs were thick, muscular, and more powerful than its hind legs, anchored to an unusually strong shoulder girdle designed to handle the strain of constant digging. Even its tusks likely played a part, acting like natural pickaxes to break through baked Triassic soil, clearing the way for its claws to do the real work. Lystrosaurus didn't just live on the land, it lived in it. And that was its superpower. By burrowing deep below the surface, it could escape the worst horrors of the New World. Above ground, temperatures soared past 140 degrees Fahrenheit, but just a few feet down, the soil remained cool and humid, a stable refuge from the burning sky. These underground shelters offered more than comfort. They provided air that was easier to breathe, protected from the toxic smog and low oxygen of the surface. The humidity prevented deadly dehydration, and the dirt above acted as a perfect shield against the third killer, the relentless UV radiation blasting through a sky stripped of its ozone layer. In one simple move, digging a hole, Lystrosaurus had neutralized all three threats of the Induan apocalypse: heat, suffocation, and radiation. It wasn't guesswork. We see the same strategy in modern animals today, from desert foxes in the Sahara to gopher tortoises in Florida. When the surface becomes unlivable, life moves underground. Lystrosaurus had mastered that art long before any human walked the earth. It wasn't just a lucky survivor, it was a pre-built survivalist, perfectly adapted for a world on fire. Digging bought it time, but even Lystrosaurus couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later, it had to crawl back into the thin, poisonous air in search of food and water. You could say Lystrosaurus had one of evolution's most advanced survival kits, and the next tool in that kit was hidden deep inside its chest, a respiratory system that, for its time, was nothing short of a masterpiece. While most creatures on Earth were suffocating in an atmosphere with barely 12% oxygen, Lystrosaurus was breathing with surprising ease. Its anatomy gives us the clues. That round, barrel-shaped torso wasn't just a sign of a stocky build. It housed a huge thoracic cavity, big enough for a pair of powerful lungs designed to squeeze every last molecule of oxygen from the thin air. Its short, direct nasal passages worked like a biological turbocharger, pulling in air quickly and efficiently. And when you look at its spine, those tall neural ridges rising from each vertebra weren't decorative. They anchored massive sets of breathing muscles that worked like industrial bellows, expanding and compressing its chest with incredible force. In short, Lystrosaurus was a professional oxygen extractor. In a world where every breath mattered, it had the prehistoric equivalent of a top-tier life support system, a gift that could easily mean the difference between life and death. But even with lungs like these, breathing alone might not have been enough. What happened when the skies went dark again, when a volcanic fissure erupted, filling the air with ash and blocking out the sun for months? Or when midsummer heat turned the surface into a furnace hot enough to kill within hours? Lystrosaurus, it seems, had one final ace up its sleeve. Some paleontologists believe this creature could simply wait it out by slipping into a deep state of suspended life, something very close to hibernation. It may have been able to lower its metabolism almost to zero, shutting down every non-essential system until conditions improved. The evidence comes from an unlikely place, a single fossilized tusk found in Antarctica. Like tree rings, tusks grow in layers over time, recording an animal's health and growth. When scientists sliced this one open, they found alternating bands, thick layers showing normal, healthy growth, and thin, dense lines showing periods when growth almost stopped completely. That pattern matches exactly what you'd expect from an animal that regularly shut itself down to survive extreme conditions. When food vanished or the world turned unlivable, Lystrosaurus may have simply gone to sleep, its heartbeat slowing, its body conserving every calorie until it was safe to emerge again. It could sleep through volcanic winters, outlast searing heat waves, and endure months of drought while everything else died above ground. In other words, Lystrosaurus survived the apocalypse by literally napping through it. An evolutionary strategy that's honestly a little enviable. Now imagine living a day in its world. Your day as a Lystrosaurus doesn't start with sunlight. It begins with the cool, damp smell of earth. You wake in total darkness, buried inside your burrow. The air around you is still and heavy with moisture. With a slow push of your head, you break through the packed dirt at the entrance and crawl out into the hazy dawn. The air hits you like a warning, thin, acrid, and already warm. The dim sun struggles to rise behind a veil of brownish haze. You breathe deeply, your massive lungs pulling in what little oxygen they can find. It's effortless. You're built for this. Before you stretches a world stripped bare, endless red plains dotted with low, scrubby plants clinging to life. No forests, no songbirds. Just muted green against rust-colored soil under a pale, weary sky. Driven by hunger, you begin to move, slow, steady, deliberate. You're not fast, but you don't need to be. You graze on what remains of the ancient seed ferns, tough, fibrous plants called dichroidium. Your strong, beak-like mouth snaps through their fronds with mechanical precision. It's not gourmet fare, but it keeps you alive. The silence is profound. No other herbivores, no herds of mixed species, just your kind, scattered across the wasteland. By late morning the heat turns brutal. The sunlight pounds down with physical weight, the ground radiating fire beneath your feet. You lower your tusks and drive them into the soil, prying loose chunks of hardened earth. Your powerful front limbs shovel through the dirt until you uncover the real treasure, starchy roots and buried tubers, rich in nutrients. They're your survival stash, hidden away beneath the dying world. By midday, it's too dangerous to stay above ground. The temperature climbs toward lethal levels, and the air wavers invisible waves of heat. You retreat, back into your burrow, into the cool darkness, where the temperature is stable and the air, though thin, is safe. Here you rest, drifting into half-sleep, conserving your energy while the planet above burns. When the sun finally dips low, you emerge again, driven by thirst. You find a shallow, muddy pool, the last remains of some shrinking waterhole. As you drink, you spot motion on the opposite bank, a long, narrow reptile with a hooked snout, watching in silence. It's a proterosuchid, one of the early predators. You're cautious but calm. A healthy adult like you isn't easy prey. After quenching your thirst, you lumber on, leaving the hunter behind. Eventually, you find your herd, dozens of your kind moving slowly through the fading light. Together, you settle into the dusk. Another brutal day survived. Lystrosaurus wasn't just a survivor. It became the survivor. With its lungs, its burrowing skill, and its stubborn adaptability, it found itself inheriting an empty world. The Great Dying had erased nearly everything: competitors, predators, entire ecosystems. In the vacuum left behind, Lystrosaurus filled the void. It spread like wildfire across the recovering continents. Its fossils show up everywhere: South Africa, India, Russia, even Antarctica. Proof of a creature that conquered an entire planet, stitched together as one supercontinent. Lystrosaurus didn't need forests or rivers or a perfect climate. All it needed was dirt to dig and plants to chew. It was nature's ultimate generalist, the biological equivalent of a weed thriving in the ruins of the old world. And in doing so, it may have accidentally become one of Earth's first ecosystem engineers. Imagine hundreds of millions of these creatures digging every day, turning, loosening, and aerating the rock-hard soil of the Triassic landscape. Their waste enriched the dirt, adding back nutrients to a starving planet. They weren't just surviving, they were rebuilding. Their burrows softened the land, their grazing kept hardy plants in check, and together they may have jump-started the slow rebirth of the world. But nothing lasts forever. Lystrosaurus's empire was built for a world in ruin, not one in recovery. As the planet healed, oxygen returned, forests spread, and new predators and prey evolved. Faster, sharper, more specialized life forms appeared, and in this new balance, the old generalist fell behind. Somewhere in the middle Triassic, the last Lystrosaurus drew its final breath. Its age was over. It ruled the aftermath of the greatest extinction in Earth's history, a humble creature that won by outlasting everyone else. But when the world finally came back to life, its time passed too. The king of the apocalypse faded quietly into history, a ghost of the old order, buried in the soil it once ruled. In the shadows of this shattered world, a ghost from the old order still prowled the land, the last great predator of the Permian age, a survivor of the apocalypse, now a king without a kingdom. Its name was Moschorhinus. If Lystrosaurus symbolized the new world, Moschorhinus was the fading emblem of the old one, a tragic relic of a lost age. It belonged to a group of ancient synapsids closely related to our own lineage, but this particular branch had perfected the craft of killing. In the final days of the Permian, predators like Moschorhinus were rising to power, poised to replace the saber-toothed gorgonopsids as the planet's dominant hunters. They were ready to rule. And then the world ended. Visually, Moschorhinus was a startling example of convergent evolution, the lion of its time. But this was no mammal. It had a thick, muscular body, a reinforced skull built to handle extreme stress, and a jaw powered by slabs of muscle. Inside that jaw sat its signature weapons, a pair of massive saber-like canines, not delicate slashing blades, but thick, rooted spikes made for puncturing hide and holding fast. Ironically, its name comes from Greek for calf snout, a comically gentle label for one of the deadliest animals alive. But after the Great Dying, the rug was pulled out from under it. In the early Triassic world, Moschorhinus found itself in a dire position. Its old prey, the great, diverse herbivores of the late Permian, were gone. The buffet had vanished. Only one main course remained, the tough, tusked, and overwhelmingly common Lystrosaurus. That forced a dangerous new balance, and to make things worse, Moschorhinus itself had changed. Fossils show clear evidence of the Lilliput effect, the tendency for species to shrink after mass extinctions. The surviving predators were roughly 13% smaller than their ancestors, a stunted generation born into scarcity. Every hunt was a gamble. Taking down a full-grown Lystrosaurus with its strong beak, defensive tusks, and thick build was a deadly risk. Scientists still debate how it hunted. Was it an ambush killer like a tiger, using precision and surprise? Or did it rely on brute strength, grappling prey to the ground in a brutal struggle? Either way, this was a predator, living on the edge, the last of the old rulers, fighting to stay alive in a world that had moved on. Our deepest kin in the shadows. While Moschorhinus fought its losing war against extinction, another branch of the synapsid family tree took a very different path. They weren't rulers. They were survivors. Small, secretive, and adaptable, these creatures lived quietly in the cracks of the Lystrosaurus empire. They were the Cynodonts, literally dog jaws. and they're profoundly important because every mammal on Earth today, from whales to shrews, from dogs to us, descends from these modest survivors of the Great Dying. In the early Triassic, Cynodonts were small and elusive, most no larger than a cat. You'd glimpse them only at night, scurrying low to the ground through the brush. They avoided the big predators and the endless herds of Lystrosaurus. To most eyes, they looked like minor players in the story of life. But hidden within their jaws was an evolutionary innovation that would change everything: complex teeth. Unlike the simple peg-like teeth of reptiles, Cynodonts had specialized dentition, incisors for cutting, canines for gripping, and intricate post-canines for shearing and grinding. In a world of scarcity, that was a superpower. They could chew, really chew, extracting every last calorie from whatever they caught or foraged. The best known of these early survivors was Thrinaxodon. Picture a cat-sized animal with a long body, short legs, and a face halfway between a dog and a reptile. It likely had a coat of fur, soft insulation for a cooling planet. Like Lystrosaurus, it was an expert digger. Fossils of Thrinaxodon burrows even show the animal curled up inside, and in one case apparently sharing its den with a wounded amphibian. Whether it was compassion or coincidence, no one knows. These burrows were refuge, nursery, and fortress all at once, the first whispers of the behavior that would one day define mammals. The dawn of a new age, the rise of the reptiles. For tens of millions of years, synapsids, our own ancestors, ruled the land, but the Great Dying shattered their dominance and left the world open for something new. From that vacuum emerged the archosauriforms, the ruling reptiles. From their line would come the most famous creatures in history: the dinosaurs, the flying pterosaurs, and the crocodilians. But their rise began humbly with a family of tough survivors, the proterosuchids. Imagine a proto-crocodile, long body, sprawling gait, and a hooked snout filled with serrated teeth. They weren't true crocs yet, more primitive, lighter built, but deadly. Here's the wild part. They evolved just before the extinction. For most species, that timing would have been catastrophic. For them, it was a stroke of cosmic luck. They were hardy enough to endure the cataclysm, and when it ended, they found themselves in an empty world. The old synapsid predators were gone or dying. The field was open, and the proterosuchids seized it. They spread fast, taking over the ecological niches left behind. Their fossils have been found across the ancient supercontinent of Pangea, from Russia to India, South Africa to Argentina. Wherever life could take root again, you'd find these hooked-jawed reptiles. They quickly became the dominant carnivores of their time, the new apex predators. The largest of them, Proterosuchus, stretched over 13 feet long and weighed hundreds of pounds, a Triassic monster that could bring down a full-grown Lystrosaurus. This was the beginning of a new era, the Age of Reptiles. From these first archosaurs would come all the giants to follow: the thunderous dinosaurs of the Jurassic, the soaring pterosaurs of the skies, and the crocodiles that still patrol our waters today. Their empire began here, in the ashes of the old world. The Botanical Holocaust. But the extinction didn't just wipe out animals, it annihilated the world's forests. The same acid rains, heat waves, and ultraviolet bombardments that killed the fauna devastated the flora. Leaves shriveled, soils turned toxic. The vast green landscapes of the Permian turned into barren wastelands. The most haunting proof of this is something called the Coal Gap, a 10-million-year stretch at the start of the Triassic, where virtually no new coal formed anywhere on Earth. Coal, after all, is the fossilized remains of dense, swampy forests. The fact that coal stopped forming means those forests were simply gone. The planet's great carbon cycling engine had collapsed. What survived were the botanical equivalents of Lystrosaurus, hardy weeds, primitive conifers, and ancient mosses clinging to life in the cooler, wetter regions near the poles. They were the first green shoots in a world that had forgotten what forests looked like, the pioneers of a planet beginning slowly to heal. They were the first to come back, the early pioneers of a dead planet. Thin, needle-like leaves and waxy skins helped them cling to life under a blazing sun. Every drop of water mattered now. Across the cracked ground, these stubborn plants spread in thin, patchy blankets. Among them grew a tough little seed fern called dicroidium, one of the few that could survive the heat. It became food for the countless herds of Lystrosaurus, the lumbering survivors of an age that had burned itself to ash. Scientists still argue about what these disaster plants really looked like, but the picture is clear enough. The world's lush jungles were gone. What replaced them was a dull, uniform carpet of life, stripped of all color and variety. Imagine a landscape drained of green, the soil baked red and brown, the plants dusty olive, their leaves always coated with ash. It wasn't a jungle anymore. It was a wasteland, a silent, endless plain of stubborn life holding on beneath a hazy orange sky. This was the start of Earth's slow recovery, fragile, simple, but fierce enough to endure. From the edge of extinction, nature was building itself again, piece by piece, root by root. But the silence was strange. When the forests died, so did the noise of life. The collapse of the plants triggered another disaster, one unlike anything before, the death of the insects. It's the only time in all of Earth's history when even the bugs, the planet's most resilient survivors, nearly disappeared. Poisoned air, burning heat, no plants to feed from. They couldn't make it. Beetles, dragonflies, and ancient winged creatures vanished from the skies, and in their absence the world went quiet. No hum of flies in the warmth, no chirping at dusk, no bees drifting between flowers, because flowers themselves were gone, only wind through the needles of the few remaining trees. A world that sounded hollow, waiting for life to return. It was not peace. It was the sound of emptiness. But while the surface lay silent, something dark was growing underneath. In rocks from this time, scientists have found a thin, black layer full of fungal spores, proof that, for a moment, fungus ruled the earth. It's called the fungal spike, a signature of decay. When the forests collapsed, the planet became a giant compost heap, dead trees, dead roots, dead everything. And the fungi came alive, feeding on the planet's remains. For a short time, the most successful life form wasn't animal or plant. It was rot. That's the cruel truth of recovery. Survival alone isn't enough. Life depends on connections between plants and animals, pollinators and flowers, soil and roots. The great dying shattered those links completely. The survivors were alive, yes, but lost, like a species trying to remember how the world once worked. And when the trees disappeared, the land itself began to die. Without roots to hold it together, the soil crumbled. Beneath the harsh sun, it hardened into lifeless crust. When the rains came, they hit like hammers, torrential storms that ripped the loose earth away, dragging it into rivers and seas. The planet was bleeding its own skin. In the rock record, you can still see the scars, layers of coarse sand and gravel from roaring, chaotic rivers. These weren't gentle streams winding through valleys. They were floods tearing through a world without trees. With every storm, more soil was lost, and with no soil, nothing new could grow. The planet was trapped, too barren to recover, too broken to heal. The fever had ended, but Earth was still sick. All that ruined soil washed into lakes and rivers, choking them with mud and rot. These waters turned dark, thick and poisonous, starved of oxygen, heavy with decay. Fish suffocated. The water itself became lifeless. The clues lie in the rocks. Black shale layered with traces of fool's gold, formed only where oxygen disappears. They're the fingerprints of a planet's last breaths. But even in this poisoned world, something adapted. From the stagnant swamps rose the old amphibian giants, the temnospondyls. They looked like a mix of crocodile and salamander, with wide skulls and powerful bodies built for ambush, and they thrived because they could breathe air. While the fish below suffocated, these creatures lifted their heads above the still, toxic waters and gulped what little life the air could offer. They were survivors from deep time, older than the dinosaurs, built for endurance over speed. The great dying had cleared their rivals, and now the swamps were theirs. They were the quiet kings of a wounded earth, cold-blooded monarchs ruling over rivers of death. The rivers of this wounded planet were ruled by monsters, ancient amphibians that had inherited a silent world. If you were unlucky enough to wade into one of these murky waterways, you wouldn't find peace or calm. You'd find chaos, a living museum of horror, each creature more grotesque and specialized than the last. These weren't just oversized salamanders pretending to be crocodiles. They were survivors that had exploded into every shape and size imaginable, each one engineered for its own style of killing. In the shallow edges, some had long, narrow snouts like living spears, built for speed and precision. Their jaws snapped sideways through the water, catching the few surviving fish in a blur of motion. You might not even see them, just a quick splash beside you and the sudden absence of a ripple. But not all were built for speed. Some were made for brute force, thick-skulled, broad-headed beasts with jaws strong enough to crush bone and shell alike. Their teeth weren't slender spikes, but stubby, reinforced weapons. They could pulverize the shells of the last freshwater clams or snap the ribs of any small land creature foolish enough to drink at the wrong place, at the wrong time. If one of these monsters came for you, it wouldn't be quick. It would clamp down and pull you under, dragging you into the still, dark water, where even the air felt heavy and rotten. The rivers hid predators of every scale. Some were no bigger than your hand, lying motionless in the silt, waiting to lunge at insects or tiny fish. Others were giants, longer than a man is tall, their heads the size of dinner plates. In those chest-deep channels, they were the true lords of the water, massive, cold-eyed hunters that ruled through patience and sudden violence. Picture stepping into that water. The heat presses against your skin. You can't see your feet. The smell of decay clings to the air. Something slick brushes past your leg, gone before you can look down. Then, 10 feet away, 2 eyes rise above the surface, still, watching. Before your brain can process the danger, the river explodes. A flat skull wider than your shoulders surges up from the depths, its mouth gaping open, a forest of teeth glinting in the brown light. This was what the freshwater world had become, an endless nightmare of teeth, muscle, and mud. No one knows for certain how active these creatures were. Maybe they spent most of their lives buried in silt like modern giant salamanders, only moving when the chance to kill appeared. Or maybe they were relentless swimmers, capable of chasing prey through the water for minutes on end. Either way, in that moment when they struck, none of that mattered. You wouldn't have time to wonder. In some regions, their dominance was total, a real-life amphibian apocalypse. To understand how far their rule extended, you'd have to travel to what is now Australia, a land that has always been home to strange and powerful creatures. There, in the ancient floodplains of a place scientists call the Arcadia Formation, paleontologists have uncovered the remains of an ecosystem completely taken over. The landscape was a maze of slow, oxygen-poor rivers and dark swamps, a perfect breeding ground for these amphibian predators. And the fossils tell a staggering story. 9 out of every 10 animal remains found there belong to these giant amphibians. Only a handful of fish and a few unlucky reptiles appear among them. It wasn't just an ecosystem. It was a kingdom. Imagine paddling down a modern river where nearly every animal you see, fish, birds, mammals, is a predator, all waiting for something smaller to eat. It's a food chain so warped, so top-heavy, it shouldn't even exist. But it did. The rivers of Arcadia weren't peaceful wetlands. They were choked with killers, each one feeding, fighting, and sometimes devouring its own kind. It was a planet-sized frog pond from hell, a realm of bloated, cold-blooded monarchs. And their empire didn't stop at the riverbanks. Some of these creatures broke one of nature's oldest rules. They weren't limited to fresh water. Fossils show that many could handle salt, a rarity among amphibians today, while only a single species of modern frog can survive the sea's sting. These ancient giants could swim in it freely. They wandered from rivers to coastal swamps, even venturing into shallow marine waters. It made them unstoppable, predators that ruled every wet corner of Earth. Standing on a barren Pangean shore, you'd see that even the ocean beyond was sick. There were no familiar seas, no Atlantic or Indian, just 2 immense bodies of water, the super-ocean Panthalassa and the smaller, enclosed Paleotethys, a warm cradle for the strange life of this new era. But the water itself was hostile. Dip your hand in, and it wouldn't feel cool. It would feel thick, unnaturally warm, more like a fever than an ocean. The same greenhouse heat that scorched the land had turned the seas into vast, simmering baths, and beneath that surface, something worse was happening. The deeper layers were suffocating, stripped of oxygen, while the seas absorbed so much carbon dioxide that they turned acidic. Anything that built a shell or skeleton from calcium, corals, clams, urchins, even plankton, was dissolving from the inside out. Marine scientists still argue over how severe the acidification was, but the fossil record leaves no doubt about its consequences. The great coral reefs vanished. For millions of years afterward, Earth's oceans had no true coral cities. In their place rose something ancient, microbial reefs made not by animals, but by colonies of bacteria and algae. They grew in strange, knobby mounds, layer by layer, at a pace almost too slow to imagine. These stony growths, called stromatolites, were relics of a time before complex life, 1 billion years before this moment. The oceans had reverted to their childhood, a primitive chemical world, stripped of color and complexity. If you swam through those waters, you wouldn't recognize them. It wasn't the Triassic Ocean yet. It was a wounded planet still trying to remember how to live. You're floating in a strange, quiet ocean, a haunting reflection of life's earliest days. The water around you feels thick and heavy, its color unsettling. It's not the familiar blue or green of a healthy sea. Instead, the sunlight filters through layers of murky olive near the surface and fades into deep, purplish shadows below. You realize you're swimming in poison, a chemical soup teeming with ancient, alien life. These strange colors come from massive blooms of ancient bacteria, the green and purple sulfur types. They aren't the oxygen-producing kind we rely on today. Instead, they thrive by feeding on hydrogen sulfide, the same toxic gas that smells like rotten eggs. These microbes ruled a deadly ocean, one without oxygen, but still shallow enough for sunlight to reach. In the early Triassic, the seas had turned into a giant experiment in survival, where these sulfur bacteria painted the oceans in eerie shades of green and violet. Scientists don't find their remains in bones or shells, but in chemistry. Fossilized fat molecules buried in rock, tiny chemical fingerprints that tell us these alien seas once existed. The upper layers would have been green from one kind of bacteria, with the deeper waters glowing faintly purple from another. If you could dive there, it would feel otherworldly. The water warm and suffocating, the faint stench of sulfur clinging to you. No sound, no fish, no movement, just a heavy silence broken only by your own breath. You drift through waves of color, olive fading into muddy purple, like swimming through the atmosphere of a dying planet. Yet these strange bacteria still live today, hidden in the deepest parts of the Black Sea or in rare, stagnant lakes where oxygen never reaches. They are tiny living echoes of that ancient, suffocating time. If you ventured farther out into the open Triassic Ocean, the emptiness would be overwhelming. No sharks, no schools of fish, no life. Just an endless, warm expanse of dull, tinted water, a marine desert stretching for thousands of miles. The ocean, once the cradle of all life, had nearly died, but in the shallower coastal waters, life was fighting to come back. Among the dim purple reefs of the Paleotethys Sea, a new kind of world was taking shape. The massive predators of the past, the great sharks and ammonites, were gone, their reign ended by extinction. In their place, smaller survivors began to rise, taking advantage of the open space left behind. This was the brief, shining age of the bony fish. For a moment in history, these tough, adaptable creatures became the new rulers of the sea. Ray-finned fish and coelacanths, ancestors of most modern fish, spread rapidly through the recovering oceans. They were fast, versatile, and resilient in a world still poisoned by disaster. Among them was a fierce predator called Bergeria. Imagine something like a mix between a trout and a bull shark, sleek and muscular with a mouthful of sharp, conical teeth. It was a global terror, hunting other fish across the Triassic seas. Fossils of Bergeria even contain the remains of its prey still trapped in its ribs, clear evidence that it ruled the food chain. For a short, strange chapter in Earth's history, the most powerful predator in the ocean wasn't a shark or a reptile. It was a fish. But not all sharks were gone. Some had survived, smaller and humbler than before. These were the Hypercane, ancient, tough little sharks that lived quietly on the seafloor. They weren't monsters of the open ocean, but patient survivors, feeding on shellfish and crustaceans. Their teeth reveal their secret, some shaped for grinding, others for gripping, a mouth built for versatility in a ruined world. While Bergeria ruled the upper waters, the Hypercane endured below, biding their time in the shadows. Together they painted a picture of a strange rebirth, an ocean that had nearly died, now struggling to live again, colored in the same haunting greens and purples that once signaled death. At the front of their mouths, these ancient sharks had sharp, pointed teeth made for catching quick, slippery fish. But farther back in their jaws, their teeth flattened into broad, plate-like grinders, natural crushing tools built to smash through shells. That's the secret to their survival. While other predators fought over the few remaining fish, these Hypercane stayed low and worked the seafloor, cracking open shells of whatever tough, armored creatures still clung to life, clams, crustaceans, and the last of the ammonites. This ability to crush hard shells probably saved them. When everything else starved, they turned to the one food source no one else could handle. Still, some among them were more intimidating. The largest was a genus called Acrodus, a heavy-bodied shark that could grow over 8 feet long, rivaling the size of the top bony fish predators like Bergeria. Seeing one would have been terrifying, but even this giant wasn't a fast hunter. It, too, was a slow, grinding shell crusher, a heavyweight built for brute force, not speed. Fossil evidence suggests Acridus may have been surprisingly flexible, able to move from ocean waters into rivers, much like modern bull sharks do today. Luckily for anything swimming elsewhere, it seems to have lived only in what would one day become the coastal waters of the United States. The Hyperdonts were survivors, but quiet ones, specialists who stayed on the edges of the food web, waiting out the chaos while the bony fish ruled the open seas. Swimming alongside these tough bottom feeders was another, far more mysterious lineage, the elasma branch, the ancestors of every modern shark. We know they were there, they survived the mass extinction, but when it comes to this early chapter of their story, the fossil record goes almost completely silent. All that remains of them are fragments, tiny fossilized teeth scattered through ancient marine rocks like whispers from the past. Each tooth confirms their existence, a small mineral echo saying, "I was here." But that's all we have. Their skeletons were made of cartilage, not bone, and that means their bodies almost never fossilized. Unless conditions were absolutely perfect, they vanished without a trace. For the elasmobranchs of this era, no full body impressions have ever been found. We know they swam in these warm, purple-hued seas, but what they looked like, how big they were, how they hunted, is still a mystery. Were they small, cautious survivors like the Hyperdonts lurking on the fringes, or were there larger, faster predators still hidden from discovery, true sharks capable of rivaling the great bony fish? Without bones, we can't know. Were they streamlined hunters gliding through open water, or flattened ambush predators hugging the seafloor? The teeth tell us only that they existed, not how they lived. They are the question marks of the Triassic Ocean, ghostly outlines in the fossil record. This lack of evidence has sparked endless debate. Some scientists believe they were genuinely rare, a struggling lineage, quietly rebuilding in the background. Others argue that their fossils simply haven't been preserved, that a more diverse population existed but left no trace behind. Either way, these early sharks remain phantoms, known only by their teeth, still smiling faintly from the rock. While we can describe the rise of the bony fish and the persistence of the Hyperdonts, the true ancestors of modern sharks remain hidden, silent presences in a poisoned, recovering sea, their full story still locked inside the stone. But the strangest mystery of all belongs to a completely different group, a family of bizarre cartilaginous fish that seem too weird to have ever survived. These were the Eugeniodontids, distant relatives of modern ratfish. Unlike their deep-sea cousins today, these creatures were evolutionary experiments, pushing anatomy to its limits with jaw designs unlike anything else in history. You've probably seen their most famous member, Helicoprion, the buzzsaw shark, whose lower jaw formed a perfect spiral of teeth, like a circular saw embedded in its face, or its cousin Edestus, whose jaws grew outward in curved arcs like a pair of giant shears. They were the strangest predators of the Permian, creatures that seemed to belong to a different world entirely. For decades, paleontologists believed they had all vanished in the Great Dying, wiped out with nearly all marine life. They were symbols of extinction itself, the end of an evolutionary experiment. But then, something unexpected appeared. In the rock layers after the extinction boundary, fossils began to surface, unmistakable whorls of teeth belonging to the Eugeniodontids. Against all odds, the buzzsaw sharks had survived. They didn't endure as giants. The bus-sized Helicoprion was gone, but smaller members of the family had made it through. One of these survivors was Fedenia, a modest 5-foot fish with a pointed snout and the same spiraling jaw, a smaller, humbler echo of its monstrous ancestors. Another was Caseodus, a close relative that shared the same strange design. Somehow, in a poisoned, half-dead ocean, these evolutionary oddities had found a way to hang on, a final reminder that even the strangest creatures sometimes outlast the apocalypse. It was a shark with nearly the same size and diet, but with a simpler look. Unlike its cousin, it didn't have the long upper snout or that strange circular jaw. Still, finding either of these creatures alive after the mass extinction would have been like discovering a dinosaur in today's ocean, a ghost from another time, a living fossil that somehow defied extinction. The discovery of these buzz-saw-jawed fish was astonishing, proof of life's ability to endure even the worst catastrophes. But things only got stranger. Scientists later realized that Fadinia and Cassidus weren't the only members of this bizarre shark lineage that had survived. Another closely related family had also made it through, the Edistids. If the buzzsaw sharks were nature's circular saw experiment, then the Edistids were more like scissors, sharks with vertically split mouths, lined with curved blade-like teeth that sliced instead of chewed. It was an anatomy unlike anything alive today, a unique evolutionary trial that existed only in the ancient Paleozoic seas. For a long time, scientists believed these scissor-faced sharks vanished completely in the Great Extinction, but the fossils told a different story. In the same early Triassic waters, a genus called Paradestus appeared, a true Edistid, somehow still alive after the apocalypse. Its mouth was a strange mix of crushing and cutting teeth, suggesting a flexible diet. Whatever it ate, the strategy worked. It survived the most devastating extinction event in Earth's history. What's even more remarkable is where these survivors were found. In the wilderness of British Columbia, Canada, at a site called Wapiti Lake, paleontologists discovered fossils of Fadinia, Casodus, and Paradestus, all living in the same environment. It seems these cooler northern waters acted as a refuge, a sanctuary, where the last of these ancient predators made their final stand. For a short, eerie chapter in Earth's story, the coastal seas of Pangea became a place of ghosts. A few survivors of the apocalypse, relics from two different ages, swam together in a fragile ecosystem, alongside the newer bony fish that would shape the oceans of the future, were the buzzsaw sharks and scissor-faced hunters, the final remnants of a forgotten world. But survival came with new problems. Their highly specialized jaws, evolved for crushing hard shells, no longer had the same purpose. The extinction had wiped out most shelled animals like clams, ammonites, and brachiopods. The ocean buffet they once depended on was gone. So how did they keep eating? One theory is that they became extreme specialists, hunting the few shelled creatures that did survive, perhaps the last ammonites. Another idea is that they adapted, using their jaws in new ways to hunt soft-bodied prey like fish, turning crushing tools into slicing weapons. However they did it, they managed to hang on in a world that had erased everything they once knew. But this strange rebirth didn't last. As the planet slowly recovered, new predators began to rise, faster, smarter, more efficient. The oceans filled again with life, and the world's balance shifted. Ichthyosaurs, the sleek, dolphin-like reptiles, appeared and dominated. Modern-looking sharks evolved. The ancient buzzsaw and scissor-jawed sharks couldn't keep up. Their strange bodies, once the key to survival, became their downfall. By the Middle Triassic, they were gone, this time forever. They had outlived the apocalypse but couldn't survive the recovery. The Induan epoch, that long 2-million-year hangover after the Great Dying, finally came to an end, quietly. No explosions, no sudden rebirth, just a slow thawing of a planet frozen by disaster. If you could stand on those shores and watch time move forward, you'd see Earth beginning to heal, the oceans stirring back to life, new species rising from the shadows of extinction, and the ghosts of the old world fading into history. At first, the planet's recovery was almost invisible, changes so slow that no creature could notice them within a single lifetime. But across the span of millions of years, the Earth was quietly healing. The story of this renewal was not written in fossils, but in the rocks themselves. The dark, oxygen-starved layers that marked the Induan seafloor began to fade, signaling that oxygen was once again returning to the deep. The toxic, chemical-rich waters that had choked life were clearing. The purple and green bacterial blooms that once ruled the seas were retreating, driven back into the dark, suffocating depths. Even the reefs, long dominated by mats of microbes, began their slow comeback. In the fossil record of the Middle Triassic, we see the first tiny, fragile coral colonies, the pioneers of rebuilding the ocean's great structures after 10 million years of absence. The world was remembering how to create again. On land, the same story unfolded. The age of Lystrosaurus, that stubborn, pig-like survivor that had once covered the continents, finally started to fade. As the climate stabilized and plants diversified, new ecosystems began to form. Different herbivores evolved, some larger, others more specialized. Predators followed suit, evolving to hunt the new prey. The food web, once flattened to near nothing, was being rewoven, thread by thread. Life was rediscovering its rhythm. But this rebirth took an almost unimaginable length of time, the full recovery of global biodiversity, to reach the richness of life before the catastrophe, took around 50 million years. That's a number almost beyond comprehension. To put it in perspective, the entire Ice Age, with its glaciers, mammoths, and the rise of humanity, hasn't lasted that long. Our species, Homo sapiens, has existed for only about 300,000 years. That means the planet's recovery from this one event took over 160 times longer than the entire span of human history. Imagine everything that's ever happened in our timeline, from the first cave paintings to the invention of the smartphone, repeating itself 160 times. That's how long Earth needed to rebuild itself after the Great Dying. It's a powerful reminder that extinction can strike in an instant, but creation takes patience measured in geological ages. The world's healing wasn't a sprint. It was a slow, grinding climb out of devastation, proof that life's recovery is a marathon written in stone, not years. And when the planet finally emerged from that long nightmare, something profound had happened. The Great Dying wasn't just the end of an era, it was a rebirth. A violent, world-shattering reset that wiped the biosphere clean, clearing the board for evolution to start anew. Thanks for watching. Wait for next part. Please like and subscribe my channel.